caucus time.
It's caucus time. Well, you're ready.
Wednesday. It's 10:54 a.m. It's May 7th.
Well, thanks for just dropping all that there. No, it's true. This is Wednesday, May the 7th, 10:55 a.m. Are our computers, our laptops off?
No, I said it a few seconds ago. Time moves forward like it doesn't stay the same minute forever.
Thank you, Mr. Einstein.
Tune in back next week for another caucus.
Oh, man. Welcome on in, folks. Caucus time. We kind of called this spontaneously. We're moving fast because there's a couple of things that are moving fast this week. So here's what we're doing. Right now, this is a live stream. Like we said, it's just about 11 a.m. Central Time on Wednesday. But if you're a podcast listener, we're going to get this up as fast as we can. Pronto when we're done here. And this will probably be a little bit of a shorter episode because we want to address two particularly timely things that are happening right now. So that's what we're doing. Shortened housekeeping. You know the drill. Go to unauthorizedcaucus.com. That's where you're going to find our Substack page. You'll get all of the episodes, all the links and the resources over there. And also, you'll find a great way to support us. There's a couple of sponsors. trexinc.com. Go over there for some great apparel and different things and use Caucus30. It's a big promo code for you. Also, there's a link for Wide Awake clothing down below as well. Plus, you can just go to Rumble or Substack directly and support us if you'd like. We would appreciate that. It supports the podcast growth. A lot of different things that we're doing. But we didn't want to miss an episode this week. And actually, next week, we'll be doing it maybe from D.C., I guess. Because we'll be in D.C. on Wednesday for our annual patent event. We'll maybe talk about that next week. It's our annual tradition. We talk about patents because we're there. So we'll do that next week. But in the meantime, unauthorizedcaucus.com gets you to everything, wherever you find us on Rumble, anywhere else. Hit the like and subscribe buttons to make sure you're in there, and then share it with a friend. But today, why we're here fast, hitting you on a Wednesday morning, a little different timing than normal, we are waiting for smoke.
Yep.
Normally, we try to clear away the smoke because we don't like the smoke-filled rooms of Congress. But now we want smoke, but we only want a certain kind of smoke. I'm vying for green or orange. What are you vying for? What smoke are we hoping for, Mason?
Well, it's going to be either white or black. So I'm a realist. But a brief correction.
So racist.
You say that these things are happening right now, but the papal conclave actually doesn't start for an hour. In 1 hour, the conclave will begin.
No one cares. The live stream started earlier this morning. That dictates the reality of the world, my friend.
But they're not doing anything yet.
You're a Gen Z. Aren't you supposed to know more about technology than I am? They're not doing anything yet? Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah, they're just hanging out,
Topic number 1, papal conclave. The live streams have gone up. All eyes are fixated on the smokestack, yet nothing even starts for an hour. But we are picking a new pope. And the massive consequences of this papal decision, I think, are going to be, well, it's hard to understate them. Because, as we were talking about this earlier, whether you're Catholic or not, which here you got a variety, you have a Protestant and a Catholic sitting in front of you today, there are huge geopolitical consequences for this. There's going to be an impact across all sorts of stuff when they seat a new pope. And obviously, we have just had a switch. Well, the last two was a pretty wild switch. We went from a very conservative pope, Pope Benedict, which is Pope Benedict was it XVI?
He was up there like 16th.
16th? Okay, there's been a lot of Benedicts. Yep. But also that was he was Cardinal Ratzinger before that, right? Which that's a name. If you don't associate who Pope Benedict was, for those of us not Catholic, steeped in the history here, Cardinal Ratzinger was very outspoken, very conservative, culturally, politically, really, really neat guy. He was on the heels of John Paul II, who was conservative, I think maybe more by necessity than just, super ideologically conservative. Then again, he had a very, very long time in office, in the office of the papacy. Are we using the right terminology here?
Yeah.
Okay, basically. But now, Pope Francis, his legacy is one of a very progressive leadership of the Catholic Church worldwide. So now you kind of have a really conservative and then a really progressive. So the question is, what in the world is going on? So I'm not necessarily going interview style here with Mason, but maybe Mason has some more insights. I know that what I know, tell me if I'm wrong, and then give me your insight on this. The makeup, from everything I can tell, the makeup of the current College of Cardinals, the cardinals who are going to be coming in making this decision and electing the next pope, seems to be overall ideologically majority conservative. However, they are also majority installed by Pope Francis. So which way is it going to go in my mind? Are they going to lean more on their ideology, or are they potentially going to lean more toward the honoring of Francis? Are we going to have a more progressive or a more conservative pope? This is what's being discussed. And again, even for those of us who aren't Catholic, there's still pretty significant implications because this is inarguably one of the big heads, the figures seen as a leader in Christianity the world over, and certainly has a fair say of cultural moving and shaking. So, what do you think? Did I get anything wrong in there in my outsider view in? Of course, we're all outsiders because none of us are sitting in the conclave right now. Also, should we watch the movie, or is it not accurate?
I've heard that it's terrible.
Okay.
And I don't plan to watch it.
It looked dramatic enough. But
what's his name? Father Mike Schmitz, great YouTube priest, great guy all around. I even watched him back when I was Protestant. Just a great guy to watch. The Bible in a Year guy. He did a review and he was like, "Yeah, this movie was terrible. It was like so on the nose. Like everybody that was conservative in any way was just like disgusting, and they made them just unappealing in every possible way. And then everybody that was like liberal in any way was like super nice all the time." And he was like, "Yeah, do not watch this movie. It's not worth your time, your money, or anything else you have."
Good to know. I won't bother.
Yep. So I think it's important to clarify what we mean when we say liberal and conservative when talking about like the church and the papacy, because it's a little bit different than like liberal and conservative in the United States, and I mean that even means something different than in Europe. But like in the United States, we know what the liberal views are, and we know what the conservative views are, especially on culture war stuff. There's, liberal culture war is like, yeah, you're pro-gay marriage, pro-abortion, yada, yada, yada. And then like conservative is like, you're pro-gun rights, anti-immigration, etc. And so those don't map on perfectly all the time between like, if a pope has a liberal position on one of those issues, that actually might not map on to the liberal position within U.S. politics. But sometimes it does. For example, like if a pope has a liberal position on immigration, that's going to be an identical position in a lot of ways to the liberal position on immigration in the States or somewhere else. And it goes the same way if a pope has a conservative opinion on immigration, i.e. the correct opinion, that will map on perfectly. Whereas if a pope has a liberal opinion on something like divorce and remarriage, that doesn't mean they think divorce and remarriage is a good thing or like should be totally allowed. It's more so the way that those things should be handled. So when it comes to like, a pope is being more liberal on either marriage and or divorce and remarriage, LGBT stuff, or abortion, that's not so much saying that the pope is like deciding between being conservative and rejecting those things or being liberal and embracing those things, because Catholic teaching has been specific for thousands of years now about our positions on those things. That doesn't change. What changes is the way that it's addressed and handled in society. And that can actually have an impact, because Pope Francis did have a liberal position on stuff like the LGBT issue or divorce and remarriage, which is not to say that he ever endorsed those things. I mean, we know that after Francis had that one quote that was supposedly mistranslated, and then he doubled down on it, which should dispel really any myths that he is pro-gay with what he was talking about. But it's more so like the way that the church should handle those things, and how much there should be like on the level of like your local priests, like how much authority they should have in like dealing with it, and like what you're allowed to do, and like if you can receive communion or not, or like if you can receive blessings or something like that. So that's kind of how we have to look at things. But that level of nuance does not fit into a headline very well, and like most people just aren't smart enough to understand that. So if a pope has, like, if somebody's like, oh, this pope is liberal on gay marriage, then like a bunch of Catholics in the U.S. are going to be like, oh, gay marriage is cool and okay. Whereas that's like not the reality of what's going on. But that's kind of the fallout. And some of the front runners for the papacy recognize that, and they said like, okay, like this causes scandal when you put it this way. We can't be talking about these things this way. Like even if a lot of cardinals that are in the front running for the papacy in regards to the gay marriage or like gay couples type stuff or divorce and remarriage, their position is much more like, okay, yeah, like sure, like you can pray for people and stuff, just like don't shout it from the rooftops. There should be the kind of thing done quietly, like between like the person that's dealing with something and like their priest or something like that. but yeah, I feel like that's really important to clarify because I think it can be really easy to just fall into, oh, the Pope is liberal on gay marriage, therefore gay marriage is okay. Like,
Right.
I've had people ask me about that, like liberal non-Catholic friends ask me about that, and I have to explain it, or like talking to you about it, where
Well,
from the other direction.
and that's the thing. One of the interesting things I see, and this is again from an outsider in perspective, is one of my problems with Pope. I understand Pope Francis didn't necessarily change officially the teaching of the church or the writings of the church. My problem is that Pope Francis left a lot of things open-ended. He would ask questions or address things in a pretty ambiguous way that I think was done. I would call that a purposeful progressivism. It was really done to kind of maybe shift the Overton window, not shift the actual teachings and writings of the church. So while he didn't do a lot of that, he did do a lot of the former. And I think that is where you really have a responsibility that's either wielded in a, I would call it subversive, progressive way or a more conservative way. He gave a lot of lip service to things. So that's, I understand the distinction, but it's still dangerous, even to a crowd that doesn't maybe understand the difference between the two. It still carries some weight. The questions that are asked, even if they don't change official policy, still has some issues to it. So it's that was more what Francis did in my mind than actually ramrodding through a bunch of changes for Catholic Church teaching.
Yeah, well, in my read on Francis in those kind of instances, produces it produces the same effect either way, which it like leads people to think like, oh, Catholics believe this or Catholics think this is okay. My read on it is less so that he was subversive, but rather that like translating things into like mass media and getting it to people. Like if you look at what was the document that he did on divorce and remarriage, Amoris Laetitia, I think is how you pronounce it. Like it's like 270 pages long.
I believe that's Letitia James. She's the attorney general.
No, different Letitia.
Oh, okay.
And that's 270 pages long, and like you're not going to put the full like nuance of 270 pages into a headline, but like you want clicks, so you're going to put the most sensationalized thing possible of like the Pope is being liberal on divorce and remarriage, like so. But either way, it produces the same effect. Like a Pope has to be very, even if he's not going to be like conservative with his opinions, at least conservative in how he like puts them out into the world and like says things.
Yeah.
So I think it would be good to go over real quick just who some of the most likely people are to be the next Pope. Well, and like with all things these days, there's betting markets for it.
Dear heavens.
Which betting markets for the papacy is like kind of even less reliable than like betting markets for anything else, because when it comes down to it, we don't know what's going on inside that room, and we can't really as reliably know. But the betting markets overall put Pietro Parolin at a 29% probability. Cardinal Parolin, who is the Vatican Secretary of State, he is Italian, and he is widely seen as the natural heir of Francis's legacy, and he very experienced in diplomacy, obviously being the Secretary of State, but unlike Francis, he is like just down the road, centrist and moderate on everything, and his papacy would be much more along the lines of not so much like reacting strongly or like trying to undo or trying to take further anything that Francis did, but rather kind of just like, okay, consolidating it and like moving past that and like being much more moderate, which I think would be a good thing. I mean, I would like a right-wing pope, a genuinely right-wing pope like a Cardinal Erdo, but somebody that's more moderate and isn't like throwing Molotovs into the culture war in America, whether it's on purpose or accidentally, or some combination of the two. Like I would take that. So like I'm optimistic if he does become Pope. I think that would be a good thing. I think he's a fine guy. But to go over the next few that are possible, there is Louis Tagle, Cardinal Louis Antonio Gocum Tagle, Filipino. He is the prefect of the Congregation of the Evangelization of Peoples. Hopefully he will be dropping that title if he assumes the papacy, because that is a mouthful and we could just call him Pope. He very social justice and outreach oriented in Asia. He leans much more liberal on pretty much everything, including liturgy, which liturgy I feel like is more of an insider baseball type thing for Catholics, whether you're going to let more like innovation go on within Mass about like what kind of music or order or what words people can say or the priest can say during Mass versus like traditional is like the Latin Mass, like we're sticking to the same order that was written down 1,000 years ago and we're just going to like do it that way. So he's much more on like the side of let people try things. I don't like that as much because that leads to a lot of abuses and like borderline, if not outright blasphemous situations. Number 3, Matteo Zuppi. Cardinal Matteo Zuppi is also from Italy. He's the Archbishop of, I don't know if you pronounce it like Bologna or Bologna, if you're talking about the actual place. I know we...
Bologna?
Yeah, what he said. He was a close ally of Francis, known as a street priest, has lots of diplomatic experience as well. He was Francis's envoy to Ukraine, Russia, and China. So those are some places where a lot is going on in the world right now. And this is a guy that has experience talking to those places. And then number 4 is at, and now we're kind of getting into like the lower chances, but
Right.
it's Cardinal Peter Turkson, who is from Ghana. He would be the first African pope if he were made pope, depending on if you consider Italy part of Africa or Europe. He's much less so interested in the culture war type of stuff, but very kind of like pro-environmentalist and immigration. And he would be probably pretty focused on interfaith dialogues between Muslims and Catholics, just considering a background in Africa. And then the last one I want to bring up, because those are like the top 4 most likely, but like my favorite, who is probably not going to get picked, is Cardinal Peter Erdo from Hungary. I like him. He's very, very conservative. He's like the most conservative out of everybody. I read through his opinions and I'm like, yes, 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 this is awesome. Very anti-immigration, very like bring back traditional Mass, let more people go to that, make that more available. Very much more so on the side of like, okay, these kinds of statements that Francis was making are causing a lot of scandal. We need to tone that back a whole lot and just focus on putting out right doctrine and like just telling people the truth. I mean, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but overall good. I like him, but I think he's unlikely. Parolin is the most likely, probably. I like him. He seems like he would be a moderate pope that would have a moderating effect on Catholicism. So yeah, but what are your thoughts on that? I mean,
I don't have nearly as much. I have more. I'm just curiosity is my main goal in that. I just understand the effects of it, but I don't know who really the folks are in the running, which you have a little bit more of a look at on that. So that's all I have to say about that. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah. Well, and a big thing to think about is that I think something like 1/3 of Democrats within Congress are like nominally Catholic, at least. Like there is a contingent of Catholics in the United States, and they're really split between being right-leaning or left-leaning. And like the papacy actually has an impact on can have an impact on the way those people vote and the way that they like actually practice their faith.
That actually does bring it up for me, though. Now I want to know. My only qualification: I want the next pope to excommunicate a bunch of Democrats. Who are absolutely nothing near Catholic.
I think that Erdo would do that.
Now we're talking. Okay, now I care. I care again.
Yeah.
There we go. No, I care before. But that's really my only pressing question is, will we have someone who actually demands some accountability when it comes to the radical progressive political agenda in the West, both Europe and here, and call to account some of the, hey, that does not line up with Catholic teaching, period. I wonder if we'll actually have that, because we haven't for quite a while.
Right.
I remember, did Benedict really do that? I don't feel like Benedict, Pope John Paul II.
John Paul II was dealing with communism pretty directly.
Right. But not since him have we had, because he passed away in when? 2006, 5, 3?
Around then, yeah.
It was somewhere in the mid-2000s. And yeah, that's true.
But yeah, I mean that was just a totally different like geopolitical situation across the globe, and like it makes sense that like Benedict and Francis would not really be like thinking in the same terms that John Paul II was, because like communism does not have the same. Communism as it exists today is not the same as it existed then with the USSR and like this giant godless empire that was trying to just like, you know, swallow up as much of Europe as possible. I mean, China is a pretty communist country still, different kind of communism. But it's just a fundamentally different dynamic going on there that it's harder for, and you don't really, I mean, John Paul II came from Poland, which was like ravaged by communism and Nazism, and just like really went through the ringer in the 20th century. So he had like a lot of reason to get up there and speak out and deal with these things. And I think that overall it would be good to have a pretty moderate pope just to kind of like weather the storm for now, and like consolidate like how the church is functioning and like its place in the world and the broader political situation, and like because even throwing like Molotovs from the right to the left, that can shake things up and have damage in a long-term way. It can spark a reaction, and that can be a negative thing. So, I mean, I'm okay with a moderate pope.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move to our second topic for the sake of time, because we do want to keep it brief because these things are ongoing. Again, I don't think that by the time you finish this live stream, there won't be white smoke coming out of the papal smokestack.
That would be very surprising.
Papal barbecue pit. What? Sorry, it was someone. It was my favorite meme of the week so far. You know, when Catholics choose a new pope, and you have this pope, you know, the smoke coming out of the smokestack, and then you got the other side when Baptists choose a new pastor, and here's the smoke coming out of the barbecue grill. I was like, that's I approve this message. The second topic though that we want to hit, which is currently ongoing, a little bit of a different deadline. We have some definitive dates. Ed Martin, our old boss, our good friend here, the former president of the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles, has been the acting attorney, U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia since day one. Walked into the Trump administration January 20th, raised his hand, got to work. 4-month interim position. I think it was 4 months. May 20 is when his interim, his acting position runs out. And at that point, if he has not been, which, you know, President Trump put him into the acting position and then came back and nominated him for the permanent role, which is a 4-year term, I think it is, 4 years, U.S. attorney. If the Senate does not confirm him by May 20, what happens is his acting interim position will expire, and the chief judge of the D.C. federal court gets to pick, at least temporarily, his replacement, the U.S. attorney for the D.C. The District of Columbia. The chief judge at the federal court there in D.C. is Judge James Boasberg. This is the guy who has been sticking his thumb into the middle of the Trump administration's business when it comes to deportations, foreign policy, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, and a host of others. So out of all of the federal judges who've been issuing injunctions, Judge Boasberg is kind of enemy number one on the most wanted list, for lack of a better term. He's the guy who has been really kind of the front face of this Judges Against Trump movement. So that's a whole, we've talked about the constitutionality of that. That's not what we're here to talk about. That's the guy who gets to pick on May 20 who the next DC U.S. attorney is if the Senate doesn't confirm Ed Martin. Well, guess what? We've been going through this process. There have been some hot potatoes that the Senate has dealt with. Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., people who were unpopular. And we've kind of figured out through this process there are about 3 defectors from the Senate votes. Mitch McConnell, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski. Mitch McConnell, Kentucky, Susan Collins, Maine, Lisa Murkowski, Alaska. None of the 3 of them are Republicans, and yet all 3 of them have an R behind their name. There, I said it. They're not. They don't behave as Republicans. This is if the term rhino was ever appropriately put down, Republican in name only, it applies to these swamp creatures. There are a lot of people. I dislike that. Rhino has become some big thing synonymous with establishment Republicans. I would make a distinction there. There are people who have earned the title Republican in name only. You're otherwise not one. And just, no, you're more of an establishment, trust the system guy. I don't agree with you. That doesn't mean you're not conservative, though, on some things.
And they'll still, like, vote along with Republicans. Like, we're talking about the actual swamp creatures.
We're talking about the swamp creatures who will buck very obvious things.
Right.
So,
and it's the same people that went after Gates that, like, stood against him.
Right.
Same people that stood strong against Hegseth.
So the dynamics of this are interesting because you just mentioned Gates. We've seen the Trump administration's willingness to pull back a nominee when it's just too controversial. They have backed Ed. In fact, Trump keeps pushing the door harder because, was it Monday night? Donald Trump put out a big post about how we have to confirm Ed Martin, and he actually tied it very specifically to, there are a lot of priorities here, but one of the priorities is getting Ed Martin through as the D.C. U.S. Attorney. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says so. Because of the Make America Healthy Again movement, the war on chronic disease that they want to declare. I hate to say that because the war on drugs, but whatever. We should declare a war on chronic disease. We know who's behind it. So as soon as I heard that, I thought, you know what? That's true. It's almost difficult to understate the magnitude of the D.C. U.S. Attorney Office and this whole situation around Ed Martin, because the prosecutor there in D.C. is in the middle of everything. He's right on top of the FBI. This is the guy who runs all the D.C. criminal investigations. This is the choke point for D.C.'s nasty secrets. And if they manage to block Ed, who inarguably is a truth teller that doesn't care what other people think, he's going to get to the truth of the matter, and let Judge James Boasberg pick. This almost cripples the Trump agenda moving forward. Not permanently kills it, just cripples it very badly moving forward, because this is a huge position. Whether you want to go after big pharma, weaponization of government, cleaning out the DOJ, you actually want to clean up our nation's capital, which is just a hellhole now, is what it seems like. I mean, because he is the top local prosecutor as well. This is like the district attorney for the D.C. area, in addition to being a federal prosecutor. This is so much that you look, and I was kind of surprised, although I'm not really surprised with that in mind, that this after Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, all these people that they yacked about being, oh, I don't know, are they qualified, are they this? Ed Martin is the one where they're really, the swamp, going to stick their foot down and say no. That tells you how much they apparently don't like Ed and don't like Trump's plans for going after the weaponized government, DOJ, Big Pharma, you name it. But there were 5 Senate holdouts. I think we're down to 4. McConnell, Murkowski, Collins, right? Yeah. But there were also 2 more. There was Thom Tillis of North Carolina, John Cornyn. No, that's right. I think Murkowski may have said. I haven't seen her name. But it was Mitch McConnell, Susan Collins, but also Bill Cassidy of Louisiana hasn't said anything. John Cornyn didn't until last night, and then Thom Tillis yesterday said no. Here's the interesting factors to me. John Cornyn finally admitted last night. He said, yes, fine. If this is, I think he said, I'll support him. I defer to the president's choices. John Cornyn got on board. John Cornyn, I'll remind you, is facing a primary challenge from Ken Paxton now, down in Texas.
Oh.
John Cornyn has to play nice.
Yep.
Absolutely has to. If you need to go and get that.
I'll go get that.
Go and get that real quick. Mute your mic. Or just leave it here. Yeah, we're on a live stream podcast, folks, but the doorbell is ringing, and we're the only 2 currently on the first floor, so we're going to make sure. But John Cornyn is playing nice because of what's happening down in Texas. He understands what's going on. The moment is that he must play along with the Trump agenda, or he's likely out. Because Ken Paxton, I would say, as you're putting your mic back on, Ken Paxton is probably an incredibly popular force in Texas, politically speaking. That's a serious challenge to a John Cornyn, who's not on board with the Trump agenda at a lot of points. He has to play ball. This figures. But Thom Tillis yesterday, here's one of the points I want to make, and then I want to get. Well, first of all, I'm going to pull back. So we got all these swamp creatures who have come out, and it's more than the 3. We can afford to lose 3, because then we're down to a 50-50 split. J.D. Vance comes in, breaks the tie, we move forward. We did that with Pete Hegseth. I think we've done it at least one other time. I think there were two confirmations.
Was it Tulsi?
Was it Tulsi? I don't think it was RFK, but it was Tulsi. Anyway, there's big figures. Rand has come out and said confirm Ed Martin. Mike Lee's tweeted confirm Ed Martin. A lot of good, stalwart constitutional conservatives.
And we
in the
would
Senate.
expect that.
Right, we expect it. These holdouts, though, very interesting. But before we go into Thom Tillis and his reason, what just generally, what's your reaction or your top lines on looking at all of this? Because we're here, it's May 7. We have 13 days.
Yeah.
And the Senate, by the way, didn't put him on the calendar this week, which tends to indicate that if they're not going to put him on the business calendar to put it through the Senate Judiciary Committee, what that tells me is they're just trying to run out the clock and not deal with this by May 20. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, if the like Matt Gaetz was extremely polarizing, but like if they could get Pete Hegseth through and like these very polarizing, very difficult Trump nominees through, I don't think that I think Ed will get through, and it might come down to a tiebreaker vote. But
now that I've seen John Cornyn flip, I agree with you that it may be possible.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure until yesterday, though. I was starting to get a little antsy.
Yeah, but if they do run out the clock, I mean, they still have to vote on the confirmation, right? Like they still have to do it, right?
Well, it's held in the Judiciary Committee right now. The Judiciary Committee has to report him to the floor for a full vote. So let me see here. Nomination. Hold on. You're doing the same thing?
I'm looking at the calendar.
You're looking at the calendar? Which, I wondered about this last week, because, of course, the Democrats have put up a big haul about this, but we're not paying attention to them. It's
well, because Tuesday is the 20th, and they pushed it off to next week, the 15th, because it's 15th is when they would do it, right? The Senate Judiciary Committee?
Well, now, yes, but here, a nomination can proceed to the Senate floor, even if the committee avoids it or ignores it, but it requires a specific action. Here's this, I'm looking at the Senate rules, is what I was waiting for. Typical Senate rules, nomination has to go through the committee for review before reaching the floor. If a committee fails to act by ignoring or delaying, the Senate can bypass them through the process called discharge. That's what you're looking for. This involves a motion to discharge the nomination from the committee, which requires a simple majority vote, 51, if all are present. There's your key. Once discharged, the nomination can proceed to the floor for a full Senate vote. So they can just bypass the Senate Judiciary Committee, which I love. You know, the next lines, this process is rare and politically contentious. Welcome to 2025, people. Yeah. We just rolled up federal agencies.
Well, I feel like we're not going to get 51 to vote to get them, like, to get the bypass.
50?
Well, yeah,
but if they're not there. The other day, J.D. Vance had to come in and tiebreak a 49-49 vote because, was it Sheldon Whitehouse and Mitch McConnell, one Republican, one Democrat, were not there. So it depends on if they're all there or not when this procedure gets pulled.
Right.
Which is what, welcome to quorum calls and having sleep schedules and staying on the floor to prevent a quorum call and moving on. This is where the strategy comes in to get around certain parliamentary things.
They should really have like tardy slips or like absences, and like you get like thrown in prison if you reach like a certain number of absences. Like that's how they set up the public education system to work. Like your parents go to jail if you don't show up to school.
Ron DeSantis wants to seem to do to Byron Donalds.
Yeah, let's.
By the way, can I just side comment? I really, really, really hope that the Florida gubernatorial primary for 2026 doesn't just turn into a petulant child show, because like Ron DeSantis and then Ron's wife Casey running, and then Byron Donalds and some of the bantering back and forth. I've just kind of looked at it and thought, I really hope we talk politics and not, well, you didn't show up to so many votes in Congress, and then, well, your husband is just setting you up. Oh my gosh, I would love for it to be more substantial than that. I think it probably will be. It's just I'm sharing a frustration out loud. Anyway, that's a side note. This is heating up really big. Here's your action item. Call not just your senators, call your senators, your 2 senators. Make sure you can call the Capitol switchboard. You can look them up online, find their email and call them. Tell them you would like them to vote to nominate you'd like them to vote to confirm Ed Martin. Vote yes to confirm Ed Martin. That needs to happen. You also, however, can flood Thom Tillis' office and Dan Cassidy, but Thom Tillis specifically, and ask him to change his mind and to vote yes to confirm Ed Martin. It is important that Donald Trump has his team. It's important across so many issues, whether you're the Robert F. Kennedy folks who came in, the Make America Healthy Again coalition, if you care about the weaponized DOJ against its own citizens, if you care and live in D.C. and you're a Democrat, but you just want your streets to be safe for you to walk down to the convenience store or the grocery store, we need to confirm Ed Martin, period. There's a lot riding on this. It's a very important position and role. And the last thing that I'd like to talk about in our kind of brief, so far, episode this week, Thom Tillis' stated reason when he went on record yesterday was, no, I like Ed. I agree with Ed on a lot of things. I've met with Ed. He actually gave a good answer to what we disagree on. But here's my sticking point, January 6th. January 6th was a dark day for America. Blah, 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 CNN lines. We disagree on that. And he's done a pretty decent job explaining some of it to me, but it just doesn't cut muster. This position, and he even said, Thom Tillis said, if it were any other U.S. attorney position, I would vote to confirm him, but not the D.C. one because he's wrong on January 6th. Thom Tillis, I think, really represents what my experience is. People inside the bubble of D.C. have a very different perspective on the events of January 6, 2021 than the rest of us outside. And I'm not sure how we resolve that. Do you see the same thing,
Yeah.
or am I kind of off into the weeds here on this? What do you think?
Yeah, but no, you're definitely right, and that because there was all it became a totally media concocted event afterwards, and people have just bought into that. But I don't think that's a real reason. I think that's a formal reason. I think that's just something for him to point to when he probably isn't fully on board with Ed Martin, but the real reasons he isn't fully on board with Ed Martin because he likes the swamp, he likes all the mud, he likes the money that the mud gets him. I mean, I don't know any specifics about what he has coming to him, but it seems more likely to me that the actual reason is something more along those lines than something like this, where Ed gave me his explanation and I just disagree. Because come on.
We'll see. There's a lot to this. That one though is one that we're not done with, because that single issue is viewed two very different ways by different sets of people. Mm-hmm. And I've long known this. You go and live inside the bubble when you work in the bubble of the DC Beltway. When you live there, you work there, your social life is there, you go to church there, whatever. There's I hate to say you lose touch with the outside world, but you see everything in the very nuanced shades of gray mm-hmm. version of politics, and a lot of the rest of us have retained a black and white view of some of these things, and that comes to a head. That is why mm-hmm. the rhino, swamp creature stuff, these things start getting hurled as epithets toward folks in D.C., because it seems as though you have really lost touch with how the rest of us feel. That's not to say we're right on everything, but mm-hmm. you're definitely out of step with what your constituents, most of them, think.
Right.
This is one of those interesting issues to me that I listen and I go, really? After all the things that we know and see, you're not willing to come around to, okay, yeah, this was badly handled, and it's certainly not the CNN insurrection narrative that has come up. It's more than that. There's more to it than that. It's really odd for me to see people still who I look and say, what do you watch? Do you just watch MSNBC all day long? Because they've run with the same narrative for 5 years, but mm-hmm. The rest of us know better now.
Right.
Do you not know better? And
right.
I realize, no, there are a lot of people who just disagree with me on this, and a lot of them live there in the mm-hmm. bubble. There's a different perception. That's going to be a bigger fight that we have another day, more than just Thom Tillis and Ed Martin. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, flood Thom Tillis' phone line. Flood Dan Cassidy's phone line down in Louisiana. And I'll even tell you to just tell John Cornyn thank you for making the right decision, even if he's just afraid he's going to get his tushy kicked in a primary next year. But we'll see. I'll take it. What did Phyllis say? I welcome anyone to support my issue for the reason of their choice.
Yep. So
I'll take it. I'll take this vote. Doesn't mean I won't take Ken Paxton out of Texas instead of John Cornyn. I said that. There you go, though. The Ed thing is incredibly consequential. Mm-hmm. It's not just that we're loyal to Ed. This has no connection to the fact that I know Ed, that we work for Ed. This is a seriously key linchpin in so many pieces of draining the swamp, in so many pieces of cleaning up the chronic health issues and the food and big pharma and the Department of Justice. This is a very, very big issue, which is why they're fighting him so much.
Yep.
All right.
Caucus time is over.
Caucus time is over, folks. Thanks for joining us on a special live stream. We'll get the podcast up really quick as well, and we even have a beautiful little infographic about the papal. I was trying to think of a synonym for smoke that has a P, but I don't know. We'll have the papal process up on an infographic for you, plus a few other things and your action items from today. Have a good one. It'll be caucus time next week, and we'll be probably in a different office.
Yep, and in a different time. You think Ryan had trouble with the time this week? Just wait till next week.
I didn't have trouble with the time. We just went in a
you were
different
confused that the minute was different than when I said it.
time. No, your minute was wrong.
My minute was earlier than yours.
I didn't look and see 10:54. We're going to go and settle this off screen, folks.